Hey, what's up? It's Menta, and this is what we're going to be making today. Today, we're going to be looking at a request I've had from someone in my Discord server, link down below, uh, and that is how I layer up my leads, layer it up with chords, get that really big anthem style, uh, floor filling melody. And so I thought I'd go through it all completely from scratch with a melody sent to me by the person that requested it. So first off, how I like to start things is just to basically grab a character lead that I like the sound of. I'm going to go silent for this, call it lead. And to be honest, a lot of things, it's just trial and error. That's how it goes. I like a lot of the Code Black pack. It has got a lot of really interesting lead textures in it you can use to start with. So I'm going to start from the bottom because I always start from the top normally. And we'll just listen to a few of these. But first of all, this is the melody. I know it's got some portamento in it. So we're going to make sure a mono legato, not slide. And I think I looked at this quickly before. I think about 35, 36 milliseconds of porta time is going to sound quite nice with this. So we're just going to look through some presets, potentially find something that we like the character sound of, and then possibly change it slightly to give it a slightly different texture. But yeah, so here we go. It's the melody. See, I'm not feeling that straight away. Melody's pretty catchy, as always, from Whirly. That's what you got. I'm just going to quickly flick through some of these and try and find a sound I can grab onto. Right, I think I've found the sound we're going to go with. I'm going to do a little couple more edits to it. So I'm going to bring this down to 35, 36 milliseconds. Again, this is the sound I've gone for. One thing I'm going to do is, it's on a triplet LFO rate at the moment. I want to push it up to 128. Just preference. Changes the character of the pitch LFO slightly. And I'm also going to change it from a saw wave to a half pulse. It has weird artifacting on the distortion, but the overall character I still quite like. It might actually be the chorus, not the There we go. So we're going to go with that for the lead character. Right, so what I'm going to do is, usually at this point, I would process the leads. As you can see, what I've done is I've put the lead in the group, but all the effects have been turned off in the groups. The lead, delay and reverb, they're pretty standard. I use a similar sort in all my songs. So in this case, I'm going to leave them be, but I've turned the effects chains off for now. And then same with the final master bus of the leads. I have disabled all the processing because we're going to go through and we're going to do that manually. So just going through the volume faders at the minute, which just balances everything out nice anyway. To keep the context, actually, what we'll do is we'll process this lead sound now. I think that'll be the best way round. So I'm going to pop the lead here and we're going to chuck it here and we can leave it repeating or whatever while we go through. So the actual lead layer itself, we go with a Pro Q. I like to do a low cut up to where the bottom of the lead sound starts. Because as you can see, right here, there is a lot of low end noise just there. It's not adding anything to the sound, but it is filling up your headroom, and it's just not necessary. So I get rid of that, and I also go through here and free up some headroom on the other side, basically up to a point where it's not adding anything, if you know what I mean. And unless I particularly feel like we need to do some shaping EQ on this specific layer, that's as much processing as I do on the individual layers in the stack. One thing I'm also going to do, just in case we need them, is pull over some more layers and route them through the group. We might not need that, but we will keep it in just in case. So what I like to do here is I've got some shaping EQ, which again does a low cut and then slightly boosts around the high mids and slightly lowers the treble. And that's just because the sound signature I want to go for is high energy, and so I push the high mids a little bit. Then we've got Oxy OTT, which is a fantastic plugin from Oxygenetics. It's basically OTT on steroids. It recaptures standard OTT, but it has a lot more features and a lot more customization. I use Hard Dance Lead, which is a preset, comes with it, and I just change it slightly. It does some slight clipping. I lower the mix down on this one, and I may lower the amount. I can't entirely remember. And that takes it from this to this. It adds a very, very subtle extra slamming. It just slams and compresses it and makes it really over compressed. I then use British Clean on Camel Crusher, and the only changes I've made to this is I think the compression amount is slightly lower. That lowers the volume a bit, but the very small amount of distortion does make a difference. But it's not too much that it kills it. I prefer using it subtly. It is quite pleasing when you turn it up, but let's leave it subtle. Right here, we've got another shaping EQ. And it does basically the exact same thing, but more of a cut in the treble, about 8K. But again, the high mids are slightly boosted, and that's post effects. So after we've compressed twice and saturated a little bit with Camel Crusher, we then press the high mids a little bit more. So far we've gone from 2. It's a lot of subtle changes, but they all add up, and you end up with a slightly crispier sounding lead. And then I've got a Pro Q on the end, which just does some resonance. This obviously needs to be changed. I have it in a bus, but it needs to be changed for every single synth. These are usually hotspots of where I usually find resonances in my lead stacks. I can try and show them. They might exist, they might not. I won't come back and do this until we've got a full lead stack though, because obviously you can add resonances through other layers and things like that. See, that's not the most pleasant. Neither is that. So there are still resonances there. My delay is pretty standard. I obviously did do a video on this processing of leads, but a lot has changed in the past year, so it is worth doing this again. I do a low cut about 800 hertz on the delay so that we don't want any low mids cutting in to the delay. Then my delay settings are ping pong on a 2, so 8th note delay with not a lot of feedback at all. There is a balance in here. That is just for automation. I don't actually use it much. So you go from this. You can hear how subtle that delay is, but it does add enough space to make it worthwhile. And you can hear the feedback's really short, so it doesn't actually get in the way when it's in the mix in context. Then we've got my reverb, which is Steal It Now. That's the preset. We've got a little bit of shaping on the reverb. So this is the reverb bus. This is to basically bring out the character of the reverb that I want personally. This one's just to take out a little notch at 5K. Then I've got my actual shaping reverb because I want a bit more character from the mids. And this is basically just because vintage verb has quite a lot of control, but I always want that little bit extra. And so that's why it's in its own group. And then we've got the compression, which I just do on the fruity limiter. So it's basically 4 dB again, 30 dB threshold, minus 30 dB, sorry. 3:1 compression ratio with a longer attack time and a long release. The attack being 60 odd milliseconds and the release being about 300 or so. And that sounds like this. Now, I want to show something that I don't think is explained enough anywhere. If we bring the threshold really, really low down so you can make this really obvious, the attack in these big swelling reverbs, we lower the attack and the release. You get an immediate response from the compressor lifting off. You don't get that big sweeping sidechain sound, which is what you want from a big, EDM reverb. I sit my attack. So the release, the sweep is actually done off the release, which if you have set to nothing, you just get an immediate response. You can see that here. Let me make this bigger. You can see it's like straight up immediate. If we up the release to where I put it like 300 odd milliseconds, so you get that sweep, and you also don't get the peaks in the middle with short notes. And that's very important because you don't get this kind of horrible pumping compression with your reverb. You just get the clean sweep at the end. And it took me a while to work that out because, to be honest, I couldn't really find many places that really told you in that much detail how it worked. So that's how that works anyway. And the attack is the opposite of the release. It's how fast the compressor reacts when another note plays. And I put that semi-long as well at about 60 milliseconds so that you sort of blend in the sweep into the next note. It's not really jarring and abrupt. But it's not really long. It just blends and meshes quite nicely. So that is how the reverb's done. Now, on the end, there is another limiter in here. Ignore that. That's a different style of reverb. I do that with it's kind of a big roomy reverb. I can show you what it sounds like. It's basically the same thing, but with a really tiny threshold and a lot more gain and a really short attack. It's basically just a really big reverb, and I use it for harder drops where I want just a massive space being made, or big roomy style. In this case, on this lead though, I actually think, I forgot to put the threshold back up. -30 is going to be slightly too much. You can kind of do this obviously by your ear. I feel like a lot of reverb's coming through there. I want it slightly drier sounding, so I'm going to go with the -32. That's just for taste. Then we have the final bus, and how I like to process this is very similar as well. The important thing to remember here is this group is affecting the dry signal of your lead layers. Then this group is affecting both the dry signal as well as your delay and reverb, and this is where a lot of the soundscape is made. The issue, I mean, you could say, oh, why do you need to process anything on here when you could just do it here? And to that I say it's additive, you know. This is how I want the lead to sound before it hits delay and reverb, and this is how I want to inflate all three of these at once. The way I look at it is you're picking layers together, and what you're doing is you're putting it into a lead group, and you're trying to make it a cohesive sound before you start processing it further. And that is what this processing does. It brings all of these layers together into one sound with its own processing on it. Then we push it through delay and reverb, and then we inflate everything together as a group. So first off, I use LALA. This is free from Analog Obsession. I think it's on their Patreon. And what I like to do with this is we will need to adjust this as the more layers come in, because the input signal is obviously heavily gauged by how this works. But I tend to go with a peak reduction to hit around about 3 dB of gain reduction. Peak reduction in this case. And that just cleans up the peaks and makes it so we don't get any spikes that jump, you know, several dB above. It makes it a lot more consistent, which means you can push it harder on the master later on and everything like that. So this also does 4 dB of gain. So what you're doing is you're taming the peaks by about 3 dB and then adding 4 dB of gain, which brings the peaks and the sustain just a lot closer together, and you end up with much more sort of glued sound. It's a very good compressor for gluing stuff. I then have trusty Oxy OTT again on the same hard dance lead. This time the mix is higher, the amount is higher, and I will have to check, but there might be difference in the bands as well. There is, yes. So before the treble band is a lot lower, because this preset I think starts at about 10 dB gain of the treble band, and we're going with an 8 dB of gain on here, and obviously the amount's quite a lot different, and the mix as well. And this is really just to inflate that reverb and that dry signal to new levels. Now I should say you are perfectly able to use OTT, standard OTT, very, very usable still. And I used to use it a lot. The depth, I think I would go with 100. The time I would sit about 163%. The output gain I obviously drop down to like gain stage, make sure it comes out the same as it goes in. I think I go with about an upward of about 30% and a downward of sort of a high 20s, or it might actually, no, it's the downward slightly higher, upward slightly lower. And then I usually just boost the highs by about 2 dB and the mid band by about 1 dB. And it's not going to sound the same as what I'm doing with Oxy OTT because obviously there's a lot less control in X for OTT, but you will get a similar inflation sound. So feel free to use OTT. So obviously it's free. But yes, so sound before, and then I'll enable OTT on this as well. Obviously that inflates everything. The reverb gets bigger. We're really slamming it now. And that brings out a lot of the character and a lot of the sound we want. I also did say I used to bring down OTT's gain. And yeah, that's not the case with Oxy OTT. It's what it is. If it sounds good, it is good, right? So then I have a saturation knob, which takes ages to load. And I'm fairly aggressive with the saturation here on the neutral band. Obviously, saturation knob's free, so you can grab this. This one, just as the name suggests, it saturates, so it's going to soft clip it a little bit and give a nice pleasing warmth to it. We're starting to get our sound now, and then I run it through Oxford Inflator on 100% effect, nearly 9 dB of gain on the curve, and around about 3 dB output, minus 3 dB output. And that, again, just soft clips more, inflates. Then I have a Pro Q, and this actually does do some additive EQ, which is, again, just a shape, give some overall shape. And this is also to cut any lows that may have been introduced from any of these plugins, like the saturation could add harmonics, it could end up low, unlikely, but it's just a catch-all to guard it. And then we have a boost around 600 hertz, about 1700 hertz, and then about 6.5K. But it's all kind of, you can see it's quite just a slow lift of about 1 dB throughout, and that takes it from this just brightens the sound a little bit more. And then finally we got an ozone imager 2, and all I do on here is 10% on the width, and that just boosts the gain on the sides. I could do this with Pro Q, I could do this with any mid-side EQ if I wanted to, but this is just simply raise the sides by 10% width, and I do it because I think it sounds good. And that gives you a bit more width. Just subtle, but it is effective. So we've gone from this to and there we go. And that is how I process my leads. Now we've got them processed. The only other thing to note is there's a filter and a kickstart, which is obviously for sidechain and a drop, and filter is just my envelope filter of choice to filter low cut, simple filters. So now we've got this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the chords sound, I usually, these days, I have a go-to chord sound I'm using at the moment, which is this Saw SQ preset from the Code Black pack in Sylenth. I still think that Sylenth is a godsend for chords, for super saws. There's some really good super saws out of other products, but I really like Sylenth. I don't really do anything. I think I adjust the release on this, and that's it. And I'm bring the chords in. We'll adjust those chords in a minute, but this is what they sound like. I'm not going to go through my chord processing. It's very similar to the lead processing. The reverb is literally a carbon copy. I take this, I do File, Save Mixer Track State, and I drag it over here. And what that does is it basically just remakes the entire thing. And that's identical, and I do that for consistency. Because these are always both playing together, I want the reverb to behave exactly the same way on both of them so we don't get any mess. The pre, unlike this with its OTT and crushing, this is very simple. It just does a low cut, high cut, and some resonance control, and then slightly lowers the highs because I don't want them to interfere too much because it's a supporting element. I don't want it to interfere with the highs of the leads. And then afterwards, we have a slight bit of shaping with a couple of notches for resonance, and basically the same thing. We have 3 dB of peak reduction on LALA. We have a hard dance lead with even more of a mix. You can kind of see comparison to that. It's slightly different again to the OTTs we used elsewhere. Inflator is same 100% effect, no curve gain, and a similar output. Then I have a shaping where I lower the low mids, I boost the mids, and I lower that presence and the treble, and that's just for shaping. Again, supporting element, I want it kind of out there. One thing I do with this is I sidechain to it and then use track spacer so that when the lead and the chords are playing together, the chords are slightly ducking when the lead plays. Show that in action in a minute. And I have a free mute, a filter, a balance for if I want to adjust the volume of the chords, and then a kickstart, you know, very standard stuff. That's fully open. Kickstart's not on at the minute. You can hear the difference there. There we go. And then now what I like to do with the chords is my chords tend to be made up of 2 layers. It's usually another silent player, and it's usually just something that I think suits the track that's slightly different to what we've got. And the second chords are always the octave below. So in this case, I like my first set chords, these ones, I actually like them higher up so they don't interfere as much with the lead. Then we have the second one, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to use another one I like the sound of in the bass modulators pack. There's one called Flex. It's got quite a sort of lower, grittier sound. I think it pairs quite well with this. And you've got the big reverb swell at the end. What I do with this is very similar. We'll grab a Pro Q and we'll do a low cut and a high cut on these. Now in this case, I'm actually cutting off a little bit of the lows of this layer. I sometimes would go all the way down to 100 hertz, but because you've got a mid bass and you've got a sub, I like to try and keep that bit fairly clear, and you can get enough weight behind these chords, about 200 hertz on the low cut. So I like to go with that. And then both of these together, obviously. And chords are nice and easy. So we've got chords. The only thing I'm going to tweak is I'm going to bring down the release slightly. Oh, that's it. On that one, and bring the release up on these slightly as well. Gives you a little bit of breathing room at the end on that release on the synth. It sounds quite nice. And I want to make the release consistent between the two layers of the synth. One thing that's important to note here is how different these chord sounds are. They're obviously on different octaves, and they also have different characters. And you can hear individually there. Neither of those are going to clash because they're very much their individual sounds that when you put them together make an overall full sounding mix on the chords. So that's important. Now if we bring in the lead, we have that. What I'm going to do is slightly change these chords, I think, because slightly too on the lead, I think. One thing I like to do is invert my chords. These are inverted. This is a D major inversion, and then that's not an that is not an inversion. But I might try and split these more across the octaves. One thing I like to try and do, just because of this, is if we chuck that down, what do we get? That is very much too non-harmonized. We take it one step further, maybe? We might not have to do this. I might be going mad. It might be to do with something else I've done, which is very likely. Okay, no. I do quite like that, you know. Quite like that. One thing I also like to do on the chords is add the bass notes in. I think we're in the MIDI. I'm going to check. Yes, lovely. What we'll do is copy that into here. Did not work, did it? Copy that into here, and then One thing I am also going to do, which I'll do after, is I chop the note lengths of this. Right. And now all of these I usually chop off a little bit, just so we get a little bit of a more cutting chord sound. Oh boy, the piano was still there, sorry. There we go, and then we'll copy this down to this one, and this is like the lower octave. So, all together. I did not mean to press save. It's not sounding quite clean to me yet. Press and save. What I might do, as you heard there, is I think the low end of this sound is quite messy. So I'm thinking what I'll do is part of layering up is basically get rid of that sound and replace it with something different. So back to the lead we go. Wait, actually, I have moved this down again, haven't I? I did want this higher up. Let's see if we can move it higher up and get it to gel better and move this back. Now we've got the chords in. I'm now wondering whether I like that lead sound. We might be going back and picking a different lead sound. This is what I mean by it's all trial and error. But now I've put those chords in and got a little bit more context, I actually think this might sound better with something slightly different. So we're going to go and do that. That sounds way better to me. Okay. We're getting somewhere. What I do now is we start layering this lead up. We think, what more does this need? Because at the moment, it's a little bit thin. And this is where we pop in another lead stack here. And I'm going to actually go for another synth. Let's go for Serum. I've got some really good freshly squeezed layers in here. Leads, sorry, not layers. And what we can do is, I think I might potentially layer up the character, maybe. But I might try an octave lower and see if we can find something that sounds... And basically this is just listening in context, flicking through bits and pieces. Because a lot of the time, there are some people who know exactly what kind of layer they want, and I do to thicken things. I know exactly what kind of layer I'm going to go for. But when it comes to character, I more or less like to just flick through a load of pre-mades and just go, ooh, until something grabs me, and go, ooh, actually, that's quite a good sound. And in this case, that's what we're going to do. I'm going to turn off the chords for now and layer up this lead nicely, and then we'll bring the chords back in, just so I can hear slightly more of what's layers doing what. Make sure there's no funny business. This is a perfect idea of character. Can you hear, just by flicking through, how this layer here adds so much weight to that square character without sounding like two sounds on top of each other? It's just kind of a warm saw, and it kind of fills in the gaps. And it almost sort of phases with each other in an intentional way where it kind of works quite nicely as opposed to conflicting, which is also quite interesting. So there we go. Let me turn this one off a minute. Now we're going to try and find some more. And I just do this until I've basically finished up with a sound I quite like. The key when looking for layers for your lead stack is find something. If you're playing it all together and the sound you're flicking to either just doesn't make a difference to your ears or makes it sound weaker in any way, it's just not the layer for you. You just need to go through until you can clearly hear something more defined coming through. It's almost something I'd quite like, but I think I'd probably go more of a detuned saw over this kind of a sound. Again, it's a very plucky layer. I like to do this a lot. It's kind of like almost a trancey pluck layer. It adds, it doesn't detract again. So if you hear without, Just adds a little bit extra. And that kind of builds our character. Now what I want to do next is thicken it up. And for that I'm going to go back to silent. Because I want to get quite a detuned saw now. And one I quite like to use is from Fruity Masters Soundbank. And it's called Support Saw, as the name suggests. This has got way too much poor Menta on it, but yeah. Quite a thick, broad sounding saw. So let's try and fill that in. It's actually not doing as much as I was hoping. I might try and detune it more and see if we can bring out a bit more thickness. That's detracting from it, sadly. One thing I would try and do actually, let me reset the preset. Oh, it's got the quarter time on it. A lot of the time voicing is a big problem. So just popping this up an octave adds so much more depth to it. And actually, adding that layer also sounds like it brings the pluck out a bit more as well. And now we're going to add back in the chords and we're going to see. But first, before I do that, I'm going to go through each of these layers and do the low cuts. This pluck's a prime example of lots of low end. Unnecessary. Just tone down the low end. To smooth it out a little because the low end of this is actually quite... It's a bit too muddy. It's not muddy, but it's a little bit too much presence there. I didn't want. So we got rid of that. So we've got 4 layers. We bring the chords back in. We have ourselves a lead. If we check span, we have a pretty decent full sounding lead. If anyone looked, the mono compatibility is hovering around about 0, and To be honest, that's fine. The thing is, when you're layering loads and loads of supersaws, you're going to get loads of phasing. There's no way to avoid it. The nature of a supersaw is unison, is to detune a load of supersaws so they phase together. That's what makes a supersaw. So, happens. And if we bring up the inspector and put it in mono, you'll hear that, yeah, it sounds like it's in mono, and it will lose some of its weight, but it will still sound audible. As you can hear, no phasing issues whatsoever. We're absolutely fine on that front. So, what I'm going to do, now we've made a lead stack, is I'm going to develop it a little bit into a build, because context is important and you aren't going to know how good this sounds without that context. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the bass notes, and I need to turn this into sub bass notes and then mid bass notes, because to make these sound full you have to have both of those things. The sub, I'm going to just use my standard sub. I'm not going to go through processing on this today. I also chuck 10 dB of gain reduction on the balance for my lead intros. And what we'll do is we'll move this, and in fact what we will also do, a little trick for you, if you probably know already, but if you don't, I have to be a pain, right? Turn off the lead delay and arm the lead for recording. And turn those things back on so that you don't forget. If you Control E and bring this up in Edison, and take off the transient, and probably that little bit as well, and then do Tools, Fade In, and D-click out, replace the file. What we do is pop this in here, and this gives you your quick build. And I didn't mean to do that. And let's lower the sound of that quite a bit. And we'll quickly do the reverse crash deal, which I already have set up. Mixer presets are your friend. Make sure you save away your chains once you've made them. Makes life a lot easier. And then I'm going to use my impact. My favorite impact that I use in majority of my tracks. Chuck that in there, and it needs to be about -18 balance wise. Pop that in. And then my crash. And chuck that into my crash processing, and sounds kind of empty so far. And this is the important thing. At the moment, this will sound quite empty. That is not a problem. The thing is, you could see that and hear that and think, oh, that's missing quite a lot of frequencies. And that is intentional, because you need to leave space for your bass, your mid bass. So I'm going to pull in my sub, which I need B, G, D, and A. So there's B, D, G, D. I think I need a high D. Low G. Okay, what we're going to do is I'm just going to have to manually make my sub real quick. I've just bounced that sub out, is all. It's just slightly quicker, but not in this case. My sub, we're going to take the bass notes and pump them in my sub. And then sub needs to go on to sub bass. There's sidechain on that, get rid of that. Sounds a little bit better, but that's not the only thing we need. We need a mid bass as well. This is where you really get some different stuff coming in. What I'm probably going to do is go with maybe a pluck bass or something. I'm just going to layer this in here as the roller bass, mid bass, whatever you want to call it. It's going to do the exact same thing. Perfect. Oops, wrong one. So let's build this up a little bit more. We'll chuck on some sweeps. Let me do a very short sweep. And pop that on in there. And what we'll do is with the lead and the chords and the sub, in fact, we will bring in the filter. So the way I like to do my filters is on a MIDI out. Go into my filter. I need to remove the vibrato from the MIDI. Oops, not that. Just these bits. Because we can't have the envelope triggering on these bits because it will sound horrible. It will re-trigger. And any slide notes of any kind need to be non-slide. Okay, I think that's right. We'll see in a minute. Then my filter and potentially adjust the depth afterwards, but and the chords. our own filter. And then the roller bass, which I'm literally not even going to process for the purposes of this. We're also going to put a low filter on. And then I'm just going to grab a stone bank roll. Like that. And then another sweep. Here we go. And we need a little impact of some sort. Where's my... Oh, too many samples, I'll be honest. Right. Let's grab a fill. Drum fills. I might just use one I've used before. Hold on. Me. Maybe like that. I don't actually know how long this is meant to be. Silly. Oh, it is probably. And then try not to fill through there. I'm probably going to use a different one, to be honest. None in there. Did I use a furnace? I don't actually know if this... if we take off that... And then quickly chuck a very basic drop in here. Means I'm actually going to have to automate that sub, aren't I? Oof. This is not going to sound very perfect by any means. It's literally just a reference because I'm not going to bother to do any sampling of my sub or anything like that. We're just going to go with what we're going with. That's the sub there. Let's do sub 2, cut off the roller bass, and then it's just sub 2, and then gonna need an exhaust. Probably some crowd noise, which is here, and the exhaust and the crowd noise can go through my sidechain effects, so we get a nice pump in on that. The crowd edit is gonna have to go down. And then we need a multi-sample bass of some sort, which I might just nab one from the new Brackus and Darwin pack. Let's go with Buzzbee. Just chop, chop, chop. G. It might work. It might not. We're about to find out. And I'm going to chuck that on my standard reverse bass. And then also Pro Q, I need to chop out the sub from this. And let's see how this is going to sound. I want to see if that sounds fine. I'm going to grab my one of my go-to kicks as well. I'll go with this one and pop that on here and see what this sounds like. Oh no, I may have forgotten to do all of them. Yeah, quite glad I noticed that quickly. That would have been horrible all the way through. The A as well. I think that's all of them. We're chucking a riser here as well, why not? Tuned risers. I don't think I've gone through these, but have we got anything in B? What are we starting at here? F. Well, we could go with the F sharp. Oh, I'm just going to do my own riser quick. It'll be quicker. We'll grab one of these ones. Pretty sure there's quite a lot in here. There we go. A riser. A riser. So we got something nice. We'll call that riser. And we need to chuck that in here with a balance. As well. Okay. We'll chuck in the crash again. Is there an off snare? There is. We'll see if this didn't sound too bad. Once we get the percussion in, why not? I'm just going to chuck an open hat in there as well to finish it off. And two eyes. And then we've got pretty much good to go with it in context. And then we're finish it off with a little filter out. Try crushing it. Right, little post update, because I realised two things. I did a slight bit more balancing just to make it so that the lead wasn't quite so overpowering. But perhaps more the issue of to why I was like, why is this drop sounding slightly off? I did not add any sidechain. So just gonna quickly do that. And then yeah. Then we will see how it sounds. Finally. And then I will do the chords. There we are. So, finally, full sidechain involved. This is what we ended up with. I should also note, this has now got a quick master on it as well. So it will sound loud and fat. And there we go. That is how to make a lead, layer up a lead, and make everything sound full enough. Yeah, well, thanks for watching. I hope this helped. I hope you learned something. And until next time, I'll catch you later. Cheers.